Baby found a bear. Cub trapped in a funeral home preparation room. What Baby did next brought life. The Marshall Funeral Home sat at the end of Maple Street like a forgotten memory, its Victorian towers reaching toward a sky heavy with snow. That December evening, the snow fell in thick curtains, muffling every sound until the world seemed wrapped in cotton. Inside those old walls, 23-year-old Lily Morgan moved through the corridors with practiced quiet, her footsteps barely disturbing the dust motes that danced in the amber light from antique wall sconces. She had been working there for only 3 weeks, hired by Ethan Marshall himself to help with the administrative tasks that had piled up since his father passed 6 months ago. The funeral home had been in the Marshall family for 4 generations, and now it belonged solely to Ethan, though he wore that inheritance like a burden rather than a blessing. Lily had noticed how Ethan moved through the building like a ghost himself, his tall frame always slightly hunched, his gray eyes never quite meeting anyone's gaze. At 35, he carried himself like someone much older, weighted down by something more than just the family business. The other employees whispered about him when they thought no one was listening. They said he had changed after his father died, became more withdrawn, more silent. Some nights, they said, he stayed in the building until dawn, walking the halls alone. Lily tried not to listen to the gossip, but she couldn't help noticing how the sadness seemed to radiate from him like cold from a winter window. That particular evening, everyone else had gone home early because of the storm. Ethan had told Lily she could leave too, but she wanted to finish organizing the old filing system in the basement office. The work kept her mind busy, and she liked the peaceful atmosphere when the building was empty. Well, almost empty. She knew Ethan was somewhere upstairs, probably in his office on the 3rd floor where he spent most of his time these days. The building creaked and settled around her as she worked, the old wood responding to the cold outside. These sounds had frightened her at first, but now she found them almost comforting, like the building was breathing, alive despite its purpose. She was filing away death certificates from 1987 when she heard it. At first, she thought it was the wind finding its way through some crack in the old windows. But then, it came again, clearer this time. A soft whimpering, almost like crying, but not quite human. Lily froze, her hand still holding a yellowed paper. The sound was coming from somewhere deeper in the building, from the direction of the East Wing. Her heart began to beat faster. The East Wing housed the preparation rooms, the places where bodies were made ready for viewing. Ethan had been very clear during her first day that she was never to go into those rooms. "There's nothing there you need to see," he had said, his voice flat and final. But the sound came again, and this time Lily was certain it was a cry of distress. Something alive was in pain somewhere in that forbidden wing. She set down the papers and stood up slowly, listening. The funeral home had many sounds at night, but this was different. This was urgent, desperate even. She thought about calling Ethan, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way he had looked when he told her to stay away from those rooms, like he was protecting her from something, or maybe protecting something from her. Her curiosity won over her caution, and she found herself walking toward the sound, her soft-soled shoes silent on the worn carpet. The hallway leading to the preparation rooms was darker than the rest of the building. The lights here were kept dim out of respect, Ethan had explained once, though respect for whom he hadn't said. The walls were lined with old photographs of the funeral home through the decades, stern-faced men in black suits standing beside elaborate caskets, flower arrangements that looked stiff and formal even in sepia tones. Lily had always found these pictures unsettling. All those people long dead now, their final business conducted within these very walls. The whimpering grew louder as she approached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. This was the main preparation room, the one still in use. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a soft click, and Lily peered into the darkness beyond. The room smelled of chemicals and something else, something earthier and more alive. She fumbled for the light switch, and when the fluorescent lights flickered on, she gasped. The room was exactly what she had expected in some ways, all stainless steel tables and cabinets full of mysterious bottles and instruments. But in the corner, huddled against the wall, was something completely unexpected. A small bear cub, no bigger than a cocker spaniel, was pressed into the corner, its dark eyes wide with fear. Its fur was matted with snow and dirt, and it was shivering violently. Lily's first instinct was to run, to get away from this wild animal that had somehow found its way into this sterile space. But then she looked closer at the cub. It was so small, so obviously frightened. One of its paws was held at an odd angle, and she could see dried blood on its fur. The cub looked at her and made that whimpering sound again, and all of Lily's fear melted away. This wasn't a dangerous predator. This was a baby, lost and hurt and afraid. She took a step closer, speaking softly. "Hey there, little one. How did you get in here?" The cub pressed itself harder against the wall, but it didn't growl or show its teeth. It just watched her with those dark, intelligent eyes. Lily looked around the room, trying to understand how a bear cub could have gotten inside. The windows were all closed and locked, sealed against the winter cold. The only door was the one she had come through. It didn't make sense. Unless someone had brought the cub here, but why would anyone bring a bear cub to a funeral home? And why leave it in the preparation room of all places? She noticed a bowl of water in the corner near the cub, and what looked like some kind of dried meat scattered on the floor. Someone had been trying to care for it, but not very successfully. The cub looked thin beneath its fluffy fur, and that injured paw needed attention. Moving very slowly, Lily lowered herself to the floor, making herself smaller, less threatening. She had grown up in the mountains outside town, and her grandfather had taught her about wildlife. "Never run from a bear," he used to say, "but never corner one either." But this little one was already cornered, and it was the one who wanted to run. She sat cross-legged on the cold tile floor and just waited, letting the cub get used to her presence. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the cub's shivering seemed to ease slightly. It was still watching her, but some of the wild fear had left its eyes. "You're hurt," Lily whispered. "Someone tried to help you, didn't they? But they didn't know how." She thought about Ethan, about his strange behavior, his insistence that she stay away from this room. Could he have brought the cub here? It seemed impossible, but then again, nothing about this situation was possible. She remembered something her grandmother used to say about grief, how it could make people do unexpected things, reach out in unexpected ways. Maybe Ethan had found this cub and saw something in it that spoke to his own pain. Maybe he had tried to save it, but didn't know how. Just like he didn't know how to save himself from the grief that was drowning him. The cub made a small sound. Not quite a whimper this time, more like a question. Lily extended her hand very slowly, palm up, letting the cub smell her from a distance. "I won't hurt you," she said. "I promise. I just want to help." The cub's nose twitched, and it leaned forward slightly, catching her scent. She could see how young it was, probably only a few months old. Where was its mother? Bears didn't abandon their cubs unless something terrible had happened. This little one was alone in the world, just like Ethan. The realization hit her suddenly. That's why Ethan had brought it here. He saw himself in this orphaned creature. but he had hidden it away in this room of death. Unable to bridge the gap between his desire to help and his fear of feeling anything at all. The preparation room, where bodies were made ready for their final journey, had become a prison for something very much alive. The irony of it made Lily's heart ache. She thought about all the people watching from somewhere far away, maybe from their own quiet rooms, their own places of isolation. Sometimes the smallest gesture of connection could mean everything. Sometimes just knowing someone else was there, watching, caring, could make the difference between despair and hope. The cub took a tiny step forward, then another. Its injured paw made it limp, and Lily could see the pain in its movements. But it was coming toward her, drawn by something in her voice or her stillness. She remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The cub stopped just out of reach, its body tense, ready to flee at any sudden movement. They stayed like that for a long moment, two creatures separated by species but united in this strange moment of trust. Then, so slowly she almost didn't realize it was happening, the cub closed the distance between them. It sniffed her outstretched hand, its wet nose cold against her palm. "There you go," Lily whispered. "See? We're going to be friends." The cub's tongue darted out, tasting her skin, and she felt its warm breath on her fingers. Very carefully, she moved her other hand toward its injured paw. The cub flinched but didn't pull away. She could see now that something had cut deep into the pad of its foot, maybe wire or broken glass. The wound was infected, swollen, and hot to the touch. This cub needed medical attention, and soon. But first, she needed to gain its complete trust. She spent the next hour just sitting with the cub, letting it get used to her presence. She talked to it softly, telling it stories about her childhood in the mountains, about the time she had seen a mother bear with two cubs playing in a meadow. The cub seemed to like her voice, and gradually it relaxed, even going so far as to rest its head on her knee. She could feel its breathing, rapid at first but slowly steadying. This was trust, pure and simple. This wild creature had chosen to trust her, and she felt the weight of that responsibility. She was so absorbed in the moment that she didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. It wasn't until the door opened that she looked up to see Ethan Marshall standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and something else. Fear? Anger? No, she realized. It was shame. He stood there in his rumpled suit, his tie loose around his neck, looking like a man caught in the middle of a secret he couldn't bear to share. His eyes went from Lily to the cub and back again, and she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. "I told you not to come in here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. But there was no real anger in it, just a deep, aching sadness. He looked at the cub resting against Lily's knee, and his expression crumbled. "I told you to stay away." He leaned against the doorframe as if he needed its support to remain standing. The fluorescent lights made him look pale, almost ghostly, and Lily could see he hadn't been sleeping. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his usually clean-shaven face showed several days of stubble. "Ethan," Lily said softly, not wanting to startle the cub. "How long has it been here?" She kept her voice gentle, non-accusatory. She could see he was barely holding himself together, and the wrong word might send him fleeing into the night. The cub lifted its head at the sound of Ethan's voice, and to Lily's surprise, it made a small sound of recognition. It knew him. He had been coming here, trying to care for it, but something had kept him from fully committing to saving it. Ethan's shoulders sagged. 3 days, he admitted. "I found it 3 days ago." He moved into the room slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. The cub watched him but didn't show fear. It was by the cemetery, by my father's grave. Its mother had been hit by a car on the highway. I saw it happen. The cub was just sitting there beside her body, crying. His voice broke on the last word, and Lily understood. He hadn't just seen an orphaned cub, he had seen himself. "So you brought it here," Lily said. Not a question, but an understanding. "You wanted to help it." Ethan nodded, sinking down onto one of the metal stools. He looked exhausted, defeated. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't leave it there to die, but I didn't know how to. He gestured helplessly at the room around them. "This is all I know anymore. Death, preparation, making things presentable for the end. I don't remember how to nurture life." The cub had lifted its head and was looking between them, as if following the conversation. Lily stroked its fur gently, feeling the warmth beneath her fingers. "But you did nurture it," she said. "You brought it somewhere safe. You gave it food and water. You tried." She looked at Ethan, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the cold, distant employer, but a man drowning in grief, reaching out for anything that might pull him back to the surface. "I used to be different," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Before my father died, before my mother left when I was 12. Before all of this." He gestured at the room, at the building, at his entire life. "I used to care about living things. I had a dog once when I was a boy. After Mom left, that dog was everything to me. When it died, my father told me to stop crying, that death was just business, nothing personal. He made me help prepare the dog for burial, taught me to detach, to see death as just another service we provided. I learned the lesson too well." Lily felt tears prick her eyes. She thought about all the people out there watching their screens, looking for connection, for understanding. Sometimes we all felt like orphaned cubs, lost and afraid, hiding in corners where no one could see our pain. But connection was possible, even in the darkest places, even in rooms designed for endings. She looked at the cub, then at Ethan, and made a decision. "We're going to save this cub," she said firmly. "Together, you and me. We're going to heal its paw, feed it properly, and find it a safe place to live. Maybe a wildlife sanctuary, somewhere it can be with other bears when it's older. But first, we're going to show it that not all humans are sources of pain. We're going to show it that kindness exists, that caring isn't weakness." She looked directly at Ethan. "And maybe, in saving this cub, we save something in ourselves too." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. The walls he had built so carefully began to crack. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I've forgotten how to care for living things. I only know how to prepare them for death." But even as he said it, he was moving closer to the cub, his hand reaching out tentatively. The cub sniffed his fingers, then licked them, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "That's okay," Lily said. "We'll learn together. That's what living is, isn't it? Learning how to care, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." She thought about all the small acts of kindness that could change a life, like someone taking the time to watch a story, to leave a like, to subscribe to a journey they wanted to follow. These tiny gestures of connection could mean everything to someone who felt alone. The cub trusts you, Ethan. It knows you saved it, even if you don't know how to finish what you started. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Lily convinced Ethan to call a veterinarian friend of hers who specialized in wildlife. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived within the hour, despite the storm, her pickup truck loaded with medical supplies. She didn't ask many questions about why there was a bear cub in a funeral home. She just set to work, cleaning and bandaging the infected paw, giving the cub antibiotics and pain medication. The little bear was brave through it all, seeming to understand that these humans were trying to help. The cub's about 4 months old, Dr. Chen said as she worked. Male, malnourished, but not critically so. The paw will heal with proper care. He's lucky you found him when you did. She looked at Ethan with knowing eyes. Sometimes we find what we need to save at exactly the right moment. She left them with detailed instructions for care, medications, and the number for a wildlife sanctuary 2 hours north that would take the cub when he was healthy enough to travel. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable happened in the Marshall Funeral Home. The building that had felt like a tomb began to feel alive again. Ethan and Lily took turns caring for the cub, whom they had started calling Oliver, though neither could say exactly why that name felt right. They set up a proper space for him in an unused room on the ground floor with soft blankets and toys that Lily bought from a pet store. The cub's personality began to emerge as he healed. He was playful, curious, surprisingly gentle for a wild animal. Ethan began to change too. The first time Lily heard him laugh, really laugh, was when Oliver knocked over a stack of papers and then tried to hide under a blanket that was far too small to cover him. It was a rusty sound, like a door opening after years of being closed, but it was genuine. He started coming to work earlier, not to sit alone in his office, but to spend time with Oliver before the day's duties began. He would sit on the floor, letting the cub climb on him, both of them playing with a gentleness that spoke of mutual healing. "My father would have hated this," Ethan said one afternoon, watching Oliver chase a ball around the room. He would have said it was unprofessional, inappropriate. "A funeral home is no place for life," he would have said. He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe that's why I needed to do it. To prove him wrong. To prove that even in a place dedicated to endings, beginnings are possible." Lily watched the transformation with wonder. The cold, distant man she had met just weeks ago was revealing himself to be someone entirely different. He had just been frozen, she realized, like the winter landscape outside. All he had needed was a little warmth, a reason to thaw. Oliver had provided that reason, but she had played a part too. She had shown him that it was okay to care, okay to feel, okay to let life back in, even when death felt overwhelming. The other employees noticed the change too. The funeral home felt different, lighter somehow. Even the families who came in for services seemed to sense it. There was still appropriate solemnity, still respect for grief, but there was also a subtle warmth that hadn't been there before. Ethan was more present with the families, more genuinely compassionate. He had remembered what it meant to feel, and that made him better at his job, not worse. One evening, as snow fell again outside, Lily found Ethan sitting with Oliver in the makeshift nursery they had created. The cub was almost asleep, his head resting on Ethan's lap, making small contented sounds. Ethan was stroking Oliver's fur absently, his expression peaceful in a way she had never seen before. "He'll be ready to go to the sanctuary soon," Ethan said quietly. "His paw is almost completely healed." "How do you feel about that?" Lily asked, sitting down beside them. She could see the conflict in his face, the joy that Oliver would have a chance at a real life, mixed with the sadness of letting go. "It's the right thing," Ethan said after a moment. "He needs to be with other bears, to learn how to be wild, but—" He trailed off, his hand still moving through Oliver's fur. "But you'll miss him," Lily finished. Ethan nodded, and she saw tears in his eyes. Not tears of grief this time, but tears of something else. Love, maybe, or gratitude. You saved him, Ethan. You gave him a second chance. That's not nothing." She paused, then added, "And he saved you too. Didn't he?" Ethan looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw all the walls finally come down. "I was dying," he admitted. "Not physically, but in every other way that matters. I had turned this place into my tomb, and I was just waiting for my own ending. Then I saw that cub by my father's grave, crying for its mother, and I saw myself. But I also saw a chance to do something different, to choose life over death for once. The night before Oliver was scheduled to go to the sanctuary, they held a small farewell party. Just Ethan, Lily, Dr. Chen, and a few of the other employees who had grown fond of the little bear. They gave Oliver special treats, played with him one last time, took photos that would seem impossible to anyone who didn't know the story. A bear cub in a funeral home, surrounded by people who dealt with death, all of them choosing to celebrate life. "You know what the strangest part is?" Ethan said to Lily as they watched Oliver play. "This building has seen so many endings, so many final farewells. But this is the first time it's seen a beginning. Oliver came here broken and afraid, and he's leaving healed and ready for life. That's never happened here before." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Maybe it should happen more often." The morning they took Oliver to the sanctuary was bittersweet. The drive north was quiet. Oliver in a special carrier in the back seat, occasionally making small sounds as if commenting on the journey. Ethan drove while Lily navigated, and they talked about everything and nothing. About Oliver's future, about the funeral home, about life and death, and all the spaces in between. The sanctuary was beautiful. Acres of forest and meadow where Oliver could learn to be a proper bear. The sanctuary director, a woman named Margaret, who had dedicated her life to rescued wildlife, took them to see where Oliver would live initially. It was a large enclosure with trees to climb, a pool to play in, and a cozy den for sleeping. Other young bears were visible in adjoining enclosures, future friends for Oliver. "He'll do well here," Margaret assured them. "Young bears are resilient, they adapt. And when he's ready, when he's learned all he needs to know, we'll release him back into the wild where he belongs." Letting Oliver go was one of the hardest things Ethan had ever done. The little bear seemed to sense something was changing, and he clung to Ethan's shirt when he held him one last time. "Be brave, little one," Ethan whispered into Oliver's fur. "Be wild, be free. Live the life your mother would have wanted for you." When he set Oliver down in the new enclosure, the cub looked back at them for a long moment, as if memorizing their faces. Then, with the curiosity that had never left him despite his trauma, he went to explore his new world. On the drive back, Ethan was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I want to make some changes at the funeral home. I want to start a program, maybe call it Oliver's Fund, to help families who lose children. Real help, not just funeral services, grief counseling, support groups, maybe even therapy animals visiting. I want the funeral home to be about more than just endings." Lily reached over and squeezed his hand. "That's beautiful, Ethan." Oliver would be proud. She thought about all the people who might benefit from such a program. All the grieving parents who needed to know that life could continue even after such devastating loss. "You're honoring both Oliver and your father in your own way. My father thought death was just business," Ethan said. "But it's not. It's the most personal thing there is. And sometimes, in the middle of all that death, we need reminders that life goes on. Oliver was my reminder." He looked at Lily. "You were too. You showed me it was okay to feel again, okay to care about something beyond the next funeral, the next family to serve." 6 months later, the Marshall Funeral Home was a different place entirely. Oliver's fund had helped dozens of families, and the support groups met weekly in a room that had been renovated specifically for that purpose. The walls were painted warm colors, not the somber grays and blacks of the rest of the building. Pictures of Oliver decorated one wall, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could find a way in. Ethan had also started visiting the sanctuary regularly, watching Oliver grow strong and wild. The little cub had thrived, making friends with the other bears, learning to fish in the stream that ran through the sanctuary, climbing trees with an agility that seemed impossible given his early injury. Each visit filled Ethan with a mixture of pride and joy. He had saved this life, and in doing so, had saved his own. Lily had become more than just an employee. She was Ethan's partner in running the funeral home, bringing new ideas and warmth to the old building. They had developed a deep friendship born from that strange night when she found a bear cub in a preparation room, a friendship that had slowly grown into something more. They didn't talk about it much, this growing feeling between them, but it was there in the small gestures, the shared smiles, the comfortable silences. One year, after finding Oliver, Ethan stood at his father's grave, but this time he wasn't alone. Lily stood beside him, and they had brought photos from the sanctuary to show the old man, though, of course, he couldn't see them. "I know you wouldn't understand, Dad," Ethan said to the headstone. "You'd say I've gone soft, that I've forgotten what our business is about. But I haven't forgotten. I've just remembered that death and life aren't opposites. They're part of the same story." As they walked back through the cemetery, Ethan noticed movement near the tree line. For a moment, his heart stopped. A large bear stood there, watching them. It was too far away to see clearly, but something about its stance, the tilt of its head, seemed familiar. "It can't be," Lily whispered, gripping his arm. The sanctuary was hours away, and Oliver wouldn't be released for another year at least. But the bear took a step forward, and even at that distance, they could see the slight favor it gave to one paw, an old injury that had healed but left its mark. "Oliver," Ethan called out, his voice carrying across the cold air. The bear's head lifted at the sound, and for one impossible moment their eyes met across the distance. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the bear turned and melted back into the forest. "That wasn't possible," Lily said, but her voice was full of wonder rather than disbelief. The sanctuary would have called if he had escaped. Ethan was already pulling out his phone, dialing Margaret's number. She answered on the second ring, and her first words made his blood run cold, then warm again. "I was just about to call you. The strangest thing just happened. Oliver was in his enclosure this morning. I swear he was. But when I went to check on him just now, he was back, but there were fresh paw prints in the snow leading from the forest. It's like he went for a walk and came back on his own." Ethan looked at Lily, then back at the tree line where the bear had vanished. "He came to visit," he said softly. He remembered. It should have been impossible. Bears didn't behave that way, didn't form those kinds of attachments to places and people. But then again, nothing about Oliver's story had been ordinary. From the moment Ethan had found him crying beside his mother's body, the little bear had been special. They never saw Oliver at the cemetery again, though sometimes they found paw prints in the snow near Ethan's father's grave. Margaret reported that Oliver continued to thrive at the sanctuary, growing into a magnificent young bear who would soon be ready for release. But she also mentioned odd things, like how he would sometimes stand at the fence facing south, toward the town, as if remembering something or someone. The funeral home continued to transform. The programs Ethan had started grew and expanded. He hired grief counselors, partnered with local therapists, even started a small fund to help families who couldn't afford funeral services. The preparation room where Lily had first found Oliver was converted into a meditation space, a place where families could sit quietly with their grief, surrounded by soft light and growing plants. Life had found its way into every corner of the building. One evening, as Ethan and Lily were closing up for the night, she found him in the meditation room, looking at a photo of Oliver they had hung on the wall. It showed the little cub as he had been that first night, frightened and hurt, but still somehow hopeful. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't brought him here?" Lily asked, joining him in front of the photo. "Every day," Ethan admitted. "He would have died, probably. And I would have continued dying too. Just more slowly." He put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become natural between them. "But you know what I wonder about more? What made you open that door that night? You could have just called me or ignored the sound altogether. What made you brave enough to investigate?" Lily thought about it for a moment. "I think I knew, somehow, that whatever was making that sound needed help, and maybe I knew that you needed help too. This whole building needed help." It was like Oliver was a catalyst, something to break us all out of our patterns, our fears. She leaned into him. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change everything. As they left the building that night, snow beginning to fall again, Ethan stopped and looked back at the funeral home. It still looked the same from the outside, still the imposing Victorian structure that had housed 4 generations of his family's business. But inside, everything had changed. It was no longer just a place of endings, but a place of transformation, where grief could be honored, but life could be celebrated too. "You know what Oliver taught me?" Ethan said as they walked to their cars. "He taught me that bringing life doesn't always mean creating something new. Sometimes it means reviving something that was dormant, warming something that was frozen, healing something that was broken. He was just a little bear cub, but he brought life to this old building, to me, to everyone he touched." Lily smiled, thinking of all the families who had been helped by Oliver's fund, all the people who had found comfort in the programs Ethan had created. "And the ripples keep spreading," she said. "Every person who finds healing here takes that healing out into the world. Oliver's impact goes far beyond what we can see." She thought about the people who might hear this story, perhaps watching from their own quiet spaces, and how they might be inspired to create their own ripples of kindness. 2 years passed. Oliver had been successfully released into the wild, fitted with a tracking collar so the sanctuary could monitor his progress. He had established a territory not far from where he had been found as a cub, as if drawn back to his origins. Sometimes hikers reported seeing a large bear with a distinctive gait, friendly but wild, watching them from a safe distance before disappearing into the forest. Ethan and Lily's friendship had evolved into love. A quiet, steady love built on shared experience and mutual understanding. They were married in a small ceremony at the funeral home, which might have seemed morbid to some but felt perfectly right to them. After all, it was where they had met, where they had learned to choose life together. The meditation room was filled with flowers and light, and if anyone noticed the photo of a small bear cub watching over the proceedings, they didn't comment. The funeral home had become something of a legend in the town. People came from neighboring communities to attend the support groups, to seek comfort in their grief. The local newspaper did a feature on Oliver's fund and its impact on the community, but Ethan always deflected credit, saying it was Oliver who had started it all. "A little bear cub taught us that, even in places touched by death, life finds a way," he would say. One autumn afternoon, Ethan received a call from Margaret at the sanctuary. Her voice was excited but puzzled. "You need to come up here," she said. "Oliver's collar stopped transmitting 3 days ago. We thought something had happened to him, but today a hiker sent us a photo. You need to see this." She texted him the image, and when Ethan opened it, he had to sit down. The photo showed Oliver, now fully grown and magnificent, standing in a meadow. But he wasn't alone. Beside him was a female bear with 2 small cubs playing at her feet. Oliver was standing protective and proud, clearly the father of this little family. But what made Ethan's eyes fill with tears was the location. He recognized that meadow. It was visible from his father's grave, the same place where Oliver's mother had died all those years ago. "He made it," Ethan whispered, showing the photo to Lily. "He didn't just survive, he thrived. He has a family." They drove to the cemetery that afternoon, hoping against hope. And there, in the distance, they saw them. Oliver and his family, grazing peacefully in the meadow. The big bear lifted his head, and even across the distance, Ethan could swear Oliver saw them, recognized them. The bear stood still for a long moment, as if in acknowledgement, then gently nudged his cubs back toward the forest. "Full circle," Lily said softly, "from orphaned cub to father. From that preparation room to this." She squeezed Ethan's hand. "You did that. You gave him the chance to have this life." But Ethan shook his head. "We did it together, all of us. Even my father, in his way, by building a place where such an unlikely rescue could happen." As they stood there watching Oliver's family disappear into the trees, Ethan thought about the strange journey that had brought them all to this moment. A funeral director afraid of feeling, a young woman brave enough to open a forbidden door, and a bear cub who needed saving. Each had played their part in a story that seemed impossible, but was absolutely true. The funeral home that had been a monument to endings had become a testament to the possibility of new beginnings. That night, Ethan sat down to write the story of Oliver for the funeral home's newsletter. He wanted people to know that miracles could happen in the most unexpected places, that life and death were not enemies but dance partners in an eternal waltz. As he wrote, he could hear Lily in the next room, on the phone with another family who had lost a child, offering them comfort and resources through Oliver's fund. The work continued, the ripples spreading ever outward. He ended his story with these words: "A baby bear cub was found in our preparation room, a place meant for endings. But what that baby did next was bring life, not just to himself, but to all of us who had forgotten what living meant. He taught us that compassion has no boundaries, that healing is possible even in the deepest grief, and that sometimes the smallest, most vulnerable among us can be the greatest teachers. Oliver's story reminds us that every ending can be a beginning if we're brave enough to open the door." The story spread beyond the newsletter. People shared it online, moved by the unlikely tale of a bear cub in a funeral home. Some were skeptical, but those who knew Ethan and had seen the transformation of the funeral home knew it was true. More importantly, the story inspired others to look for opportunities to bring life to places of darkness, to extend compassion to creatures in need, whether human or animal. Years later, when Ethan was older and grayer, he would still sometimes see bears in the meadow by the cemetery. He could never be sure if any of them were Oliver or his descendants, but it didn't matter. The legacy lived on in the funeral home that had learned to celebrate life, in the families who had found healing through Oliver's fund, in the community that had embraced a new understanding of what it meant to grieve and to hope. Lily, now co-director of the funeral home, had expanded their programs even further. They hosted art therapy sessions, children's grief camps, and even partnered with local wildlife rehabilitation centers to bring healing animals to visit those in mourning. The preparation room that had once housed a frightened bear cub had been completely transformed into a space of peace and reflection, where families could find comfort in their darkest hours. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, a young family came to the funeral home, devastated by the loss of their child. Ethan and Lily sat with them, offering not just professional services but genuine compassion born from their own journey through darkness to light. As they talked, the father mentioned something strange. "We saw a bear on the way here," he said. "Just standing by the road watching us. It sounds crazy, but it felt like a sign, like someone was telling us it would be okay." Ethan and Lily exchanged glances, and Ethan smiled softly. "Not crazy at all," he said. "Sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need to see, exactly when we need to see it. Bears are symbols of strength and renewal in many cultures. Perhaps it was reminding you that even in winter, even in the darkest times, spring will come again." As the family left, somewhat comforted, Lily asked Ethan if he really thought it could have been Oliver or one of his descendants. Ethan looked out at the falling snow, remembering that night so many years ago when she had found a bear cub in the most unlikely place. "I think," he said slowly, "that Oliver taught us that the impossible becomes possible when we open our hearts to it." Whether it was him or not doesn't matter. What matters is that the story continues, that life continues to find its way into places of death. The Marshall Funeral Home stood as it always had at the end of Maple Street, but now it was known for more than just endings. It was known as a place where miracles could happen, where a bear cub could teach humans how to live again, where death and life could coexist in a beautiful, complex dance. The building that had once felt like a tomb had become a sanctuary, not just for the grieving, but for anyone who needed to be reminded that life, in all its forms, was precious and worth saving. And somewhere in the forests around the town, bears continued to thrive, living wild and free as nature intended. If sometimes one of them paused at the edge of the meadow to look toward the old funeral home, if sometimes paw prints appeared in the snow where no bear should have been, well, that was just part of the mystery. Some stories, after all, are too magical to be fully explained. They can only be lived, shared, and passed on to those who need to hear them. As Ethan finished writing in his journal that night, he thought about all the people who might one day read Oliver's story. He hoped they would understand that it wasn't really about a bear cub at all. It was about the choice we all face every day, to remain frozen in our grief and fear, or to open the door to possibility, to connection, to life. Oliver had simply been the catalyst that showed them which choice to make. "Thank you, little one," Ethan whispered to the photo of Oliver on his desk. "Thank you for saving us all." And somewhere in the forest, carried on the winter wind, he could swear he heard an answering call, wild and free and full of life. The story of the bear cub in the funeral home had become legend, but more importantly, it had become truth. A truth that continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. The preparation room where it all began had one final transformation. Ethan and Lily decided to install a large window looking out toward the meadow where Oliver now lived with his family. It became a place where people could sit and watch for wildlife, understanding that death and life were not separate but intertwined, each giving meaning to the other. And sometimes, just sometimes, a bear would appear at the edge of the forest, standing still as if paying respects before disappearing back into the wild. This was Oliver's true gift. Not just that he had been saved, but that in saving him, everyone involved had learned to save themselves. The funeral home that had been built to serve death had learned to serve life, and in that transformation, it had become something unprecedented and beautiful. It had become a place where endings and beginnings met, where grief and hope could coexist, where a bear cub's cry in the darkness could lead to light. As the years passed, the story evolved and grew, but its heart remained the same. A baby bear was found in the most unlikely place, and what that baby did next was teach a community how to bring life to places of death, hope to places of despair, and love to places that had forgotten its warmth. It was a simple story, really, but sometimes the simplest stories carry the deepest truths. And in the Marshall Funeral Home, now bright with life and purpose, the photo of a small, frightened bear cub served as a permanent reminder that miracles come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they arrive just when we need them most, even if we don't know we need them at all. The building continued to serve its original purpose, helping families say goodbye to their loved ones, but now it also helped them say hello to healing, to hope, to the possibility that life, even after the deepest loss, could be beautiful again. This was Oliver's legacy, not just a fund or a program, but a fundamental shift in how a community understood death and life. The bear cub, who had been orphaned, had created a new family, not just of bears in the forest, but of humans who had learned to care for each other with the same fierce tenderness they had shown to one small, frightened animal. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all.